The barracks smelled like burnt metal and alien sweat, and the lights overhead flickered every few minutes, because the power grid on Vareth 9 had been half destroyed by the Devourer's swarm 3 weeks ago. Nobody was fighting tonight, though. Tonight the war had gone quiet, and soldiers from 6 different species sat in a loose circle on supply crates and broken armor panels, passing around drinks that no two of them could safely share without checking the chemical labels first. Private Alara Voss sat near the back with her knees pulled up to her chest, watching the others talk and laugh in languages her translator earpiece struggled to keep up with. The biggest voice in the room belonged to Sergeant Krail, a Dracoran who stood nearly 8 feet tall and had scales the color of volcanic rock running down his arms and neck. He was telling a story. "So Kael'thor sees the moon beast rising from the ocean," Krail said, spreading his massive arms wide for dramatic effect. "And he does not run, he does not call for help, he just walks into the water and grabs the creature by the throat with his bare claws." The other Dracoran in the room slammed their fists against their thighs in approval, which was their version of applause. "He dragged that thing onto the shore and tore its spine out while it was still alive," Krail finished with a grin full of fangs, "and that is why the Dracoran do not fear the deep." The Valesi across the circle made a soft chiming sound that meant they were impressed but not surprised. One of them, a tall figure with skin that looked like cracked quartz filled with pale blue light, spoke next. "On our world, we tell of the Resonance Mother," she said in a voice that seemed to hum at 2 frequencies at once, "who stood before a dying star and sang to it for 9 days until it burned again, and her song still echoes in the radiation belts of our home system." At that one, Scrix, a Chithra sergeant with 4 arms and eyes like black glass, clicked his mandibles and leaned forward. "The Chithra do not worship individuals," he said, "but we remember the first Swarm Queen who connected 10 billion minds into one consciousness, and used that single thought to crack a continent in half, so her children could reach the mineral veins beneath." The room was warm with pride and competition, each species trying to outdo the other, with legends bigger and older and more impossible than the last. Then someone turned to the humans. "What about you?" Krail said, looking at Alara with an expression that was already half a smirk. "Surely your little species has some stories worth telling." Alara glanced at Corporal Gian Maro and Sergeant Dane Okoro, the only other humans in the room. Okoro gave her a small nod. "Well," Alara said, sitting up a little straighter, "we have the story of Achilles, a warrior who was nearly invincible in battle. And he fought in a war that lasted 10 years over a single city." Krail blinked his yellow eyes. 10 years for one city? "It was an important city," Alara said. "How was he invincible?" the Valesi asked, tilting her crystalline head. "His mother dipped him in a sacred river when he was a baby," Alara said, "and it made his skin impossible to pierce, except for one spot on his heel where she held him." The silence lasted about 2 seconds, before Scrix let out a sharp clicking sound that the translator rendered as laughter. "A river made him invincible," Scrix repeated. "A river." "What about the Spartans?" Alara tried, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. 300 warriors held a mountain pass against an army of over 1 million soldiers, and they fought to the last man, knowing they would all die. 300, Krail said, and now he was laughing too, a deep rumbling sound that shook the crate he sat on. 100 soldiers is not an army. That is a rounding error. What kind of species sends 300 warriors against 1 million and calls it heroic instead of stupid? The Valesi chimed in with something the translator called gentle amusement. "Your heroes fought with sharpened metal and wooden sticks, yes?" she said. "Our children play with more advanced tools than that." "Tell them about the berserkers," Okoro said from behind Alara, his voice flat and hard. Alara swallowed and continued. "We had warriors called berserkers who would enter a state of rage so intense that they felt no pain and no fear, and they would charge into battle wearing almost nothing, biting their own shields, screaming, and they could not be stopped until they were physically cut apart. The room went quiet for a moment, then Scrix made a dismissive gesture with all four arms. So your greatest warriors were mentally unstable individuals who ran naked into fights. Said, on my world we would call that a medical condition, not a legend. The laughter that followed was the loudest yet, and Alara felt it land on her like a physical weight. Gianmaro's jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping under his skin, and Okoro had gone very still, in the way that experienced soldiers go still when they are choosing not to act on what they are feeling. Your species could not even leave its own star system without help from the Valesi Uplift program, Krail said, still chuckling. Your myths are not legends, little human. They are bedtime stories for a species that had nothing real to be proud of. Alara opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out, because part of her wondered if he was right. From the far corner of the barracks, where the shadows were deepest, Commander Rel Vorath had been watching the entire exchange without moving. Rel was Dracarin like Krail, but older and quieter, crossed his scales in patterns that told a story of 12 military campaigns across 9 star systems. He was the most decorated soldier in the entire coalition, and when he was in a room, other soldiers breathed a little softer. He had not laughed. He had not spoken. He had not even shifted his weight. But his eyes, dark gold and ancient with experience, had not left Alara Voss since she started speaking. And if anyone had been watching him, instead of laughing at the humans, they would have noticed something strange. Commander Rel Vorath was not amused. He was afraid. Not of the stories themselves, but of what he knew those stories actually meant, what they left out, what the humans always left out, because he had read the files that no one else in this room had ever bothered to open. And the truth was so much worse than any myth. He said nothing. He simply watched the young human woman endure the mockery with her jaw set and her back straight, and he thought about a species that had been fighting and killing and surviving on a death world for 300,000 years before they ever touched the stars. Tomorrow, they were going into the tunnels. Tomorrow, these laughing soldiers would see for themselves. Rel closed his eyes and let the laughter wash over him like noise before a storm. Morning came to Verath 9 the way it always did, not with sunlight, but with the slow brightening of the atmospheric shield that kept the base from freezing in the moon's permanent twilight. Alara woke with the laughter still echoing in her head. She dressed in silence, pulling on her combat suit and checking the seals 3 times the way Okoro had taught her during basic training, and she told herself that what happened last night did not matter, that words were just words, and the mission was what counted. But it did matter. It sat in her chest like a stone. In the mess hall she found Gianmaro already eating, or rather staring at his food without touching it, while his fingers tapped an angry rhythm on the table. "You okay?" she asked. "I am fine," he said in a tone that meant he was not fine at all. Okoro joined them a minute later, moving with the slow, careful precision of a man who had been a soldier for 15 years and had learned to save every drop of energy for when it was needed. "Eat," he told both of them. "We are going into Devourer tunnels today, and your bodies will need fuel whether your feelings are hurt or not." That was Okoro's way of being kind. Across the mess hall, the alien soldiers were already talking and preparing, and the jokes had not stopped. Scrix was telling a group of Chithra something in their native tongue that made them all click rapidly, and Alara did not need a translator to know it was about the humans. A young Dracoran soldier, whose name she did not know, walked past their table and muttered something that the translator rendered as "stick fighters," before laughing and moving on. Jian's tapping got louder. "Let it go," Okoro said without looking up. "I am letting it go." "Let it go quieter then." The mission briefing was held in the command center, a reinforced bunker at the center of the base, where holographic maps of the Devourer tunnel network floated in blue light above a circular table. Commander Rel Vorath stood at the head of the table, with his arms clasped behind his back. And when he spoke, the entire room became silent, in a way that had nothing to do with rank, and everything to do with the simple fact that Rel Vorath had survived things that would have killed anyone else in this room twice over. The Devourer swarm has established a secondary hive node in Tunnel Grid 7, Rel said, his deep voice filling the bunker like the hum of an engine. Intelligence suggests it is a relay point for the Queen's neural commands. If we destroy it, the swarm's coordination in this sector will collapse for approximately 72 hours, long enough for the Coalition to advance the front line. He tapped the holographic map, and a route lit up in red, winding deep underground through narrow passages that made Alara's stomach tighten just looking at them. I will lead the mission personally, Rel continued. 4 squads of 6, mixed species composition. He began assigning teams. When he reached the 3rd squad, he said, I will take the human fire team with me, Sergeant Okoro, Corporal Morrow, Private Voss, along with 2 Dracoran support gunners and 1 Valesi medic. The room stirred. Sergeant Krail stepped forward with a confused expression. Commander, with respect, why would you place yourself with the humans when you could lead the Dracoran assault squad? Are you questioning my judgment, Sergeant? Rel said, and his tone did not change at all, but something in his eyes made Krail take a half-step backward. No, Commander. Good. Another Dracoran, younger and less careful with his words, spoke from the back. It just seems like a waste, Commander. You are the finest warrior in the Coalition, and you are pairing yourself with the soft skins. They will slow you down. Rel turned to look at the young soldier, and the room got very cold. I choose my companions, based on what I know, Rel said, not on what I assume, and I suggest you learn to do the same before the war teaches you that lesson in a way you will not enjoy. Nobody else spoke after that. During the equipment check before departure, Rel moved through the staging area, inspecting weapons and gear, and when he reached the human fire team, he stopped and watched Okoro work for a long moment. Okoro was field-stripping his pulse rifle with a speed and precision that made his hands look like they were running on a program. Every motion identical to the one before it. No wasted movement, no hesitation. Sergeant Okoro, Rel said, Commander, how many engagements have you survived? Okoro paused for just a fraction of a second. 31 direct combat actions, Commander. Rel nodded slowly. Among the Dracoran, a soldier who survives 10 engagements is considered blessed by the old gods. 20 is considered legend. Nobody has survived 30. Humans do not have old gods for that, Okoro said, snapping the rifle back together with a final click. We just have stubbornness. Something that might have been a smile crossed Rel's scarred face. Later, as the platoon formed up at the tunnel entrance, Rel fell into step beside Alara at the back of the column. The tunnel mouth was dark, and it breathed warm, wet air that smelled like rotting metal, and Alara could feel her heart beating in her throat. Private Voss, Rel said quietly. Yes, Commander. Last night you told the story of Thermopylae. Alara felt her face flush. I know the others thought it was funny, Commander. I should not have. Tell me again, Rel said. She looked up at him, confused. Tell me about Thermopylae again, he repeated. But this time, tell me the parts you left out. What parts? Enemy dead so high that they used the corpses as a wall, Rel said, and his voice was very quiet now. The parts where they fought for 3 days on no sleep, with wounds that should have killed them in the first hour. The parts where the last of them broke their swords and fought with their bare hands and their teeth. Alara stared at him. You know the story, she whispered. I know all of your stories, Commander Rel said. I have read every human military record in the Coalition archive. Every battle, every war, every last stand. And Private Voss, I need you to understand something. He leaned closer, and his gold eyes were burning with something she could not name. Your people did not laugh when they told me those stories, and I did not laugh when I read them. I have not laughed since. Then he straightened up and walked to the front of the column, leaving Alara standing at the mouth of the tunnel, with her heart hammering, and a feeling rising in her chest that she had not felt since she left Earth. It was not pride exactly. It was something older and heavier than pride. It was the feeling of being seen. The column moved forward into the darkness, and the tunnel swallowed them whole, through the bones of every soldier in the column, and everyone told themselves it was just the moon's geological activity, because the alternative was worse. Then Scrix stopped walking. His antennae went rigid, and its forearms spread wide in a gesture Alara had never seen before, and the translator struggled for a moment before rendering his next word. Contact. The ceiling exploded. Devourer drones poured from holes that had not existed a second ago, hundreds of them, then thousands, black and wet and screaming in a frequency that made Alara's skull vibrate and her vision blur. They came from every direction. The walls were not walls anymore. They were living things splitting open like wounds and vomiting out creatures with too many legs and jaws that could bite through starship plating. The first Dracoran to fall was the young soldier who had called the humans softskins that morning. A drone landed on his back and punched through his scale. Armor like it was cloth, and he was dead before he hit the ground. After that, everything became noise and light and terror. Sergeant Krail roared and fired his heavy cannon into the swarm, each shot turning 3 or 4 drones into mist. But for every one he killed, 10 more appeared, and they were learning, adapting, flowing around the gunfire like water around a rock. The Valesi medic activated her resonance shield, and for a moment the sound pushed the drones back, but they adjusted within seconds and crashed through the barrier like it was glass. Alara watched her go down under a pile of black bodies and looked away. The Chithra soldiers broke first. It was not cowardice, it was biology. Their hive instincts screamed at them to scatter when overwhelmed, to disperse and regroup, and Scrix fought against it harder than any of them. But one by one, his soldiers turned and ran deeper into the tunnels, splitting apart, disappearing into side passages that may or may not have led anywhere safe. Then the Valesi froze. Their species processed extreme fear as paralysis, a survival mechanism on their homeworld, where standing still made predators lose interest. But Devourer drones did not lose interest, and 3 Valesi soldiers stood like statues of cracked crystal, while the swarm consumed them. Krail was screaming orders that nobody could hear over the noise, and the Dracoran line was buckling, their famous warrior pride cracking under the simple, terrible mathematics of endless enemies in an enclosed space. Commander Rel fought like a creature from the old legends, his blade carving through drones with a precision that was almost beautiful. But even he was being pushed back step by step, and the blood running down his arm was his own. The tunnel was falling. Every species was breaking, except the humans. Sergeant Dana Coro did not roar, he did not scream, he did not panic. Behind them, a narrow choke point, barely wide enough for 3 soldiers to stand shoulder to shoulder. And he made a decision that took him less than 1 second. Morrow, Voss, on me, choke point, now. They moved. Alara did not think about it. Her body simply responded to the command the way it had been trained to. And within 4 seconds, the 3 humans were standing in that narrow gap, with the entire retreating platoon behind them, and the entire Devourer swarm in front of them. Okoro fired in controlled bursts, each one precise, each one lethal, his face completely blank, as if he were doing maintenance on a piece of equipment rather than holding back a tide of monsters. Morrow dropped to one knee and worked with his hands, pulling charges from his vest and wiring them together with fingers that did not shake. Not even a little. Even though a drone got close enough to scratch a line across his helmet, before Alara shot it off him. And fired, and fired, and fired. And when a drone grabbed her arm, she smashed it across the face with the stock of her rifle, hard enough to crack its skull, and then she kept shooting. The swarm hit them like an ocean wave hitting a seawall, and the seawall did not move. Okoro took a hit in the side, a drone claw that punched through his armor, and opened a wound that poured blood down his leg in a steady stream. He looked down at it. He pulled a plasma torch from his belt and pressed it against the wound, and the sound he made was not a scream. It was something deeper and more animal than a scream, a sound that came from a place inside him that predated language and civilization and everything that separated humans from the things that had hunted them in the dark 1,000,000 years ago. Then he stopped making the sound and started shooting again. A Dracaran soldier behind them watched this happen and dropped his weapon, not because he was afraid of the drones, because he was afraid of the human. 11 minutes they held that corridor. 11 minutes against a force that should have overrun them in 30 seconds. Morrow detonated his charges and collapsed a section of tunnel ceiling that bought them another 2 minutes. And in those 2 minutes, Rel managed to rally what was left of the platoon and find an alternate route to the extraction point. They ran. The humans were the last ones out. When they finally reached the surface and the blast doors sealed behind them, the surviving soldiers collapsed onto the ground in various states of shock and injury. 26 soldiers had entered the tunnels. 14 came out, and of those 14, at least half owed their lives to 3 humans who had held a gap in the dark. Nobody spoke for a long time. Scrix sat against a wall, with 2 of his 4 arms hanging limp and broken, and he stared at the humans with his black glass eyes, and there was nothing in them that looked like laughter anymore. Krail, the mighty Krail, who had boasted about moon beasts and legendary warriors, sat in a corner, with his head in his hands, because he had seen what a real last stand looked like, and it did not match any of the stories his people told. Ilara sat on the ground with blood on her face, and her hands trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. And she noticed that everyone was looking at them. Every alien in the room was staring at the 3 humans, the way prey animals stare at something they do not understand, with a mixture of awe and terror that goes deeper than thought. Okoro leaned against the wall with his cauterized wound still smoking slightly, and his eyes half closed, and if he noticed the stares he gave no sign of it. Morrow cleaned his weapon. Commander Rel Vorath stood apart from the others, with his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. But if you knew him well enough, you might have seen the elbow. Faintest tremor in his jaw. Not from fear, from recognition. He had told Alara to tell him about Thermopylae, and she had not needed to say a single word. She had shown him instead. 3 days passed after the tunnel, and the barracks were quiet, in a way they had never been before. It was not the quiet of rest or boredom. It was the quiet that comes after something has broken inside a group of people, and nobody knows how to talk about it yet. The alien soldiers moved through their routines like ghosts, eating and sleeping and cleaning their weapons, without the usual banter and competition that filled the spaces between missions. Nobody was telling stories anymore. Ilara noticed the change immediately, but she did not know what to do with it. The other species no longer laughed at the humans, but they did not talk to them either. Instead, they watched from a distance, with expressions that her translator could not fully render because the emotions behind them were too complicated for simple words. Fear mixed with confusion, mixed with something that might have been shame. On the 3rd evening, Scrix found Ilara in the equipment bay. She was repairing a crack in her chest plate with bonding gel. He stood in the doorway for almost a full minute before speaking, his mandibles clicking softly in what the translator called nervous hesitation. "Private Voss, Sergeant Scrix, I need to ask you something. She looked up at him and waited. Scrix's black glass eyes shifted, and his lower arms folded across his thorax in a gesture she had learned meant vulnerability among the Chithra. "How?" he said. "How what? How did you do what you did in the tunnel? Your bodies are weaker than ours, your senses are duller, you have no armor skin, no venom glands, no hive coordination, no resonance abilities, your bones break more easily than ours, and your blood carries less oxygen, and you cannot see in the dark without equipment." He paused. "By every measurable standard, you should have died in that corridor before any of us, but you did not. Trying to understand why, and I cannot." Elara opened her mouth to answer, but she never got the chance. "Because you are asking the wrong question." The voice came from behind Scrix, and it belonged to Commander Rel Vorath. Rel stepped into the equipment bay, and his presence filled the room the way it always did, not with aggression, but with a gravity that made everything else feel lighter by comparison. He looked at Scrix. "You are asking how they survived," Rel said. "You should be asking why you are surprised." Scrix turned to face the commander, and something in his posture shifted from nervous to attentive, because when Rel spoke, it meant something important was about to happen. "Walk with me," Rel said, and it was not a suggestion. They walked to the barracks, where the off-duty soldiers were gathered in the same circle where the stories had been told 3 nights ago. The same crates, the same flickering lights, the same faces, but different eyes. Rel stood in the center of the circle, and he did not speak immediately. He looked at each soldier in turn, Dracoran and Valesi and Chithra and human, and he let the silence build until it was thick enough to touch. Then he began. "I have fought in 12 campaigns," he said. "I have bled on 9 worlds. I have killed enemies whose names I never learned, and buried friends whose names I will never forget, and I have fought beside every species in this coalition." He turned slowly, making eye contact with each group. "I have seen Dracoran berserkers charge fortified positions through plasma fire. I have watched Valesi resonance warriors shatter enemy formations with sound alone. I have witnessed Chithra swarm tactics overwhelm forces 10 times their size." He paused. "None of them scared me." Another pause, longer this time. "The humans scare me." The room was absolutely still. Krail shifted uncomfortably on. His crate, and the slight scraping sound, was deafening in the silence. "3 nights ago you laughed at their stories," Rel continued. "You called their myths embarrassing. You said their heroes were primitive, and their legends were bedtime stories for a weak species." His voice dropped lower. "You were wrong." He began to walk the circle slowly, hands behind his back, and his tone shifted from conversational to something older and heavier, the tone of a soldier delivering a truth he had carried alone for too long. "After my 6th campaign, I was stationed at Coalition Intelligence for 2 years. I had access to the full military archives of every member species, and because I was curious and because I had nothing else to do, I began reading the human files." He stopped walking. "I did not sleep well for a long time after that." He looked at Krail. "You laughed at the story of 300 warriors holding a pass against 1,000,000. Called it stupid, Sergeant Krail, but that story was real. It happened on their world, approximately 2,500 years before they reached the stars. 300 men held a narrow pass for 3 days against an army so large that their arrows blocked out the sun. And they did it knowing with absolute certainty that every single one of them would die." Krail said nothing. Rel turned to the Valesi. "You mock their weapons. You said your children play with more advanced tools, and you were right. Their early weapons were primitive. Metal blades and wooden shafts and rocks tied to sticks. And with those weapons, they fought wars so vast and so terrible that they killed each other by the millions, not over thousands of years, but in single conflicts lasting only a few years. They had a war they called the Second World War, in which 60 million of them died in 6 years. And when it was over, the The survivors built weapons capable of destroying their entire planet. Then they kept living on that planet anyway. The Valesi made a sound that the translator could not render. "You," Rel said, turning to Scrix, "you said their berserkers were mentally ill, that running naked into battle, screaming and biting shields was a medical condition." Scrix's mandibles were perfectly still. Those berserkers were real. They existed. They were humans who had trained themselves to enter a state of fury so complete that pain became meaningless to them. And their enemies feared them so deeply that the very word berserker survived in human language for over 1,000 years. Rel returned to the center of the circle. "But here is the thing that keeps me awake at night," he said, and now his voice was barely above a whisper, and every ear and antenna, and auditory membrane in the room was straining to hear him. "Every species in this coalition has legends. The Dracoran have Kael'thor. The Valesi have the Resonance Mother. Chithra have the First Queen. And every one of those legends is exaggerated, embellished, inflated beyond what actually happened, because that is what legends do. They make the past bigger than it was." He let that sit for a moment. "The humans are the only species whose legends are smaller than the truth." Nobody breathed. Their myths downplay what actually happened. Their stories leave out the worst parts. They soften the edges. They make their history digestible, because if they told it the way it really was, nobody would believe them, and everyone would be afraid of them. He pointed at Alara without looking at her. "She told you about Thermopylae, and you laughed, but she did not tell you about Stalingrad, where over 1 million humans died, fighting in a single city, in winter so cold it froze the blood in their veins, and they fought room by room with knives and bare hands for 5 months. She did not tell you about the Somme, where they walked into machine gun fire in straight lines, and 20,000 of them died in a single morning, and the ones behind them kept walking." His voice cracked, just barely, just enough. "She did not tell you about a place called Iwo Jima, where her people charged into tunnels not unlike the ones we entered 3 days ago, and they fought underground in darkness against an entrenched enemy for 36 days, and they did not stop." Rel looked at the 3 humans sitting together on their crate. Okoro with his cauterized wound and his steady eyes. Morrow with his quiet hands that could wire explosives in the dark. Ilara with her cracked chestplate and her jaw set the same way it had been when they laughed at her. "You asked how they held that tunnel," Rel said to Scrix. "I will tell you how. They are the product of 300,000 years of unbroken violence on a planet that tried to kill them every single day of their existence. They did not need it. They did not evolve venom because they had something better. They evolved the one thing that no other species in this galaxy has ever developed to the same degree." He paused one final time. "They evolved the absolute refusal to die." The silence that followed was the deepest Ilara had ever heard. Then Scrix stood up from his crate. He turned to face Ilara, and he raised all 4 of his arms and crossed them over his thorax, and lowered his head until his mandibles nearly touched his chest. Every Chithra in the room drew a sharp breath. Ilara did not know what the gesture meant, but Okoro did, because Okoro knew everything, and he leaned over and whispered to her, "That is the salute reserved for hive queens. Nobody uses it outside the swarm, ever." Ilara looked at Scrix, and she did not know what to say, so she simply nodded. One by one the other soldiers in the room stood. Krail was the last, and it cost him something to do it. She could see it in his face, but he stood and he dipped his massive scarred head toward the 3 humans on the crate. Rel watched it all with his arms crossed and his gold eyes burning. Then he turned and walked out of the barracks into the artificial twilight of Vareth 9, and he stood there, alone, for a long time, looking up at stars that humans had reached, not because they were the strongest, or the fastest, or the most advanced. Coalition Command had been planning the attack on the Devourer Hive Queen's central chamber for months, but they had always known it would be a slaughter. The queen was buried deep beneath the surface of Verath 9, in a fortress of living chitin that pulsed and grew and healed itself faster than conventional weapons could damage it. And the only way to kill her was to get inside and destroy her directly. 50,000 soldiers from every species in the coalition massed on the surface in the largest military formation the galaxy had seen in 300 years. Ilara stood in the human section and looked at the numbers. 200 humans out of 50,000. A fraction of a fraction. But nobody was laughing about it this time. The assault began at dawn, or what passed for dawn on a moon with no sun, and it went badly almost immediately. The Devourer swarm had been preparing too, and when the coalition forces hit the outer defenses, they met resistance so fierce that entire battalions dissolved in minutes. The tunnels were flooded with acid, and the walls spawned fresh drones faster than the soldiers could kill them. And the air itself seemed to fight back, thick with spores that clogged filters and burned skin. By the second hour, the advance had stalled. By the fourth hour, 3 generals were dead, and the coalition had lost 8,000 soldiers without even reaching the Queen's outer perimeter. Commander Rel stood in the mobile command center, listening to reports come in from every sector, each one worse than the last. And he watched the holographic map turn red section by section as positions fell and units broke, and the greatest army in galactic history ground to a halt against an enemy that simply would not stop coming. "We cannot breach the inner wall," a Dracoran general said, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "Every assault team we send is overwhelmed before they reach the entry point. Swarm density at the breach zone is beyond anything we modeled." "Then we need to draw them," Rel said. "We need a force that can punch through the breach point and hold it open long enough for the heavy armor to follow." The generals stared at him. "That would be a suicide mission. Whatever force leads the breach will face the highest concentration of drones on the entire moon. They would need to hold for at least 15 minutes under conditions that—" He stopped talking because the answer was already obvious, and everyone in the command center knew it. Rel opened a channel to the human contingent. "Sergeant Okoro, Commander, I need volunteers for a breach assault on the Queen's chamber. I will not order this because I cannot ask anyone to do what I am about to describe. The force that leads the breach will almost certainly not survive." There was a pause on the channel that lasted about 2 seconds. "How many do you need?" "Commander, as many as will come." The pause this time was shorter. "You will have all of us." Every human soldier in the coalition army volunteered. All 200 of them. Not because they were ordered to, not because they were tricked or manipulated or shamed into it, but because somewhere in the ancient architecture of their DNA was a voice that said, when the line breaks, you step forward. When the wall falls, you become the wall. When someone has to go first, you go first. And they had been listening to that voice for 300,000 years. They assembled at the breach zone in the 6th hour of the battle, 200 humans in battered armor, carrying every weapon and explosive they could find. And the alien soldiers who had been fighting and dying and failing to break through for hours stopped and watched them march past. Ilara was near the front. Her armor was scarred from the tunnel mission 6 weeks ago, and she had added new scratches since then. She carried a pulse rifle in her hands and enough demolition charges on her back to level a building, and she was terrified in a way that went beyond conscious thought. Her body knew what was coming, even if her mind had not fully accepted it. Okoro walked beside her, steady as bedrock, his cauterized wound from the tunnel now a thick scar that pulled at his skin when he moved. Mara was behind them, already calculating angles and blast patterns in his head, already planning how to bring down walls that were alive. As they passed the Dracoran lines, Krail stepped out and blocked their path. Ilara tensed, but Krail did not speak. He simply reached up and removed the campaign medallion from his own neck. a heavy disk of dark metal that represented his highest honor, and he placed it in Alara's hand. "Come back," he said. "I will try." "Do not try," Krail said, and his voice broke on the word, "Come back." And the humans marched on. The Chithra forces lined the left side of the corridor, and as the humans passed, Scrix raised all 4 arms in the Hive Queen salute, and held it. And one by one, every Chithra soldier in the line did the same. The Valesi began to sing. It started with one voice, a single crystalline note that hung in the air like light made audible. And then another voice joined, and another, until the entire Valesi contingent was singing a harmonic that the translator could not render, but that every species present understood on a level deeper than language. It was a funeral song. It was a war song. It was both at the same time. The humans reached the breach zone, and Okoro gave the signal, and they hit the wall like a fist. The fighting was beyond anything Alara had imagined, and she had imagined terrible things. Drones came from everywhere, above and below, and from inside the walls themselves, and the noise was so loud that it stopped being noise and became a physical pressure that pushed against her chest and made her teeth ache. Humans fell. They fell, and the ones behind them stepped over the bodies and kept moving forward. A soldier whose name Ilara did not know threw himself onto a drone that was about to breach their flank and held it down with his body weight while it killed him so that the soldiers behind him could keep advancing. Another soldier lost her weapon and fought with a piece of broken chitin she had ripped from the wall, swinging it like a club until a drone took her legs and she kept fighting from the ground. They were screaming, not in fear, but in something beyond fear, a sound that came from the same ancient place that Okoro's cauterization scream had come from, a sound that said, "I am human, and I do not stop." The breach opened. 15 minutes they held it, exactly as Rel had calculated, and in those 15 minutes, the Coalition's heavy armor units poured through the gap and into the Queen's outer chamber, and the real battle began. But Alara did not stop at the breach. She kept going. She went deeper, past the heavy armor, past the support lines, past the point where anyone should have been able to survive, driven by something she could not name and could not have stopped even if she wanted to. She found the Queen. The Devourer Queen was enormous, a mountain of living flesh and chitin, pulsing with the neural energy of 1 billion connected drones, and she filled the central chamber like a heart fills a chest. And when Alara saw her, she understood for the first time why the swarm was so hard to kill. The Queen looked at her. 1 billion eyes focused through one mind onto one small broken human, standing in the doorway with blood running down her face, and one eye swollen shut, and bones in her left hand that she could feel grinding together with every movement. Alara looked back, thought about Thermopylae and Stalingrad and Iwo Jima. She thought about Okoro, pressing a plasma torch to his own flesh, and then getting back up. She thought about every human who had ever stood in front of something bigger than them and refused to step aside. She armed every charge on her back. The Queen understood what was about to happen. Ilara could see it in the way the massive body contracted, and for one brief, impossible moment, a creature that controlled 1 billion drones across an entire moon felt something it had never felt before. Fear of one human. Ilara closed her eyes and pressed the detonator. The explosion tore through the Queen's chamber, like a sun being born underground, and the neural network that connected every Devourer drone on Vareth 9 went silent all at once. 1 billion screaming voices cut off mid-sound, and across the entire moon, the swarm collapsed. The war was over. Of the 200 humans who entered the breach, 41 walked out. Ilara was one of them. She was carried out by Maro, who had found her in the wreckage of the Queen's chamber, burned and broken and missing her left eye, but alive, impossibly alive, stubbornly alive, in the way that only humans can be. Okoro walked out under his own power with 3 new wounds he had not bothered to mention. Years later, the Battle of Vareth 9 was the most famous story in the galaxy. Every species told it. The Dracoran version said that 2,000 humans had entered the Queen's chamber, and that they had fought with blades of light that could cut through anything. The Valesi version said that Alara had sung a song so beautiful that the Queen's heart had shattered. The Chithra version said that the humans could not feel pain and that their blood was made of fire. None of these things were true. The truth was simpler and more frightening than any of them. After Vareth 9, his 13th and final campaign, and he spent his remaining years on a quiet colony world where the sunsets lasted 3 hours and the air smelled like copper and rain. One evening, a young Dracoran cadet visited him and told him excitedly about the legend of the human charge. The version she had learned in the academy, the one where the humans were 7 feet tall and wore armor made from devourer bones, and the one called Ilara had killed the queen with her bare hands. Rel listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When the cadet finished, she asked, "Is that how it really happened, Commander?" Rel smiled, and it was a tired smile, the smile of a man who had seen too much and remembered all of it. "No," he said, "it was not like that at all." "Then how was it?" "It was smaller," he said, "and quieter, and so much worse than you can imagine, and so much more beautiful." The cadet left confused. Rel sat alone in his chair as the long sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and amber, and he looked at the shelf on the wall, where his 12 campaign medals hung in a perfect row, each one representing a war survived and a world saved. Beside them, smaller than all the rest, was a simple metal pin. It was not coalition issue. It was handmade, pressed from cheap alloy on a ship somewhere between stars, and it had been given to him by a one-eyed woman with burn scars on her hands and a voice that still shook the room when she spoke. The pin bore 2 words in the old script of Earth, a language from a country that had not existed for centuries, a phrase spoken by warriors who had been asked to lay down their weapons and had answered with 2 words that meant, "Come and take them." Molan Labe. Rel read it every evening, and every evening he was afraid, not of the words, but of the species that had lived by them for 3,000 years and never once stopped meaning. It.